to another episode of The Man from Hildebrand. So today I will be giving a quick book review on Ian Fleming's Talk of the Devil, as well as sort of asking the question, was Roger Moore really that cheesy, and why I think the 1980s Bond could probably be a really solid decade for Bond in general. So anyway, to start it off, I have just finished reading Talk of the Devil. Now, Talk of the Devil is basically a collection of Ian Fleming's writings outside of Bond. So it kind of contains letters, articles, introductions that he wrote for other books, correspondence back and forth to people. And there's also two sort of early short stories which he wrote back in his youth. Now, it is, this has recently been, this is now available in paperback, but there was sort of a time where this was kind of regarded as a holy grail, because it was sort of a very rare collection which was only published by the Queen Anne Press, and it was very expensive. This is by the Queen Anne's Press, but I'm not too sure what edition it is, but it was about £150, and the wife had got me this for Christmas. So yeah, it is somewhat a little bit refreshing to read, is sort of just to read Fleming without it being Bond. His two short stories are sort of very good, as per usual. They're actually quite sad as well, to be fair. But yeah, the only thing that I was kind of a little bit disappointed is that I thought there would have been the article that he wrote for the Kuwait oil company, State of Excitement, which I believe is locked in the archives somewhere in America. I thought they would have probably have got this sort of in there. Now, the only thing I was kind of expecting, I was a little bit disappointed, is probably a section dedicated to Bond, and to kind of have sort of snippets or copies of his notebook. Now, I believe people have seen his notebook, and I believe his notebook is probably available to see at the university. Can't remember, but it's some university in America where his manuscripts and everything's there. But this notebook, it's really interesting because it was all the ideas and stuff that he jotted down, for future Bond stories and characters and ideas and locations and all this. Obviously, Fleming unfortunately died at quite a young age, so we never kind of got to see that. But it is always kind of food for thought when we do kind of discover these little snippets of from his notebook, and we kind of think, what could have been. Obviously the Anthony Horowitz's Trigger Mortis, that's a fine example, because that's got a chapter which was actually written by Fleming, Murder on Wheels, which was about racing cars and things, which for whatever reason never saw the light of day to be published. But Anthony Horowitz had actually gone into the archives and discovered it and kind of incorporated it into his story. He did the same with Forever and a Day. There's a chapter there which was kind of basically taken from Fleming's notebook. So yeah, one day, who knows, we may see a collection of all his notes. I think there was, I think if you look at the Octopussy and Living Daylights first edition, there's a bit of a note saying that there is to be other short stories to be published. This obviously never happened because Fleming had passed away. Now, don't quote me, but I know that there was sort of like things that Fleming had jotted down about, men, kind of catching the train, leaving for work, and, whilst their wives were probably at home stoking the fires and stuff. And these men going to the train station and greeting each other as they would probably go on their way to work. And then there was an idea which he had where Bond was going to play cards with a Greek syndicate. Can't remember his name. I think his name began with Z. So yeah, there was all these kind of sort of ideas and things that kind of what Fleming had written, and sadly they never. I mean they're not really fully accessible, and I think that's why it was so exciting that when Horowitz came with Trigger Mortis, and it included something, an unpublished piece of Fleming. I mean, anything that's considered to be lost, which is Bond related, is just huge and extremely exciting news. I mean, how fucking cool would it be if they was a lost Roger Moore Bond film or a lost Sean Connery Bond film which was made but never released? Obviously, we know that does not exist and that will not happen, and it's not out there, but just the thought. But yes, I mean, there's certainly chances of us having sort of, kind of a Bond story which Fleming had intended to publish but didn't. I mean, yes, Nicholas Shakespeare kind of sort of mentioned that in Fleming's biography, which that alone is another episode on its own to review that. But yeah, I mean, it's just the thought of all these kind of lost Bond adventures which kind of come to light, which kind of is very exciting. And I think, one day we may get a collection of, Fleming's ideas and notes jotted down. But yeah, I mean, otherwise, Talk of the Devil, if you haven't got it, I would suggest you get it. And now it's available in paperback. It's obviously a bit cheaper, and I believe the paperback does include photographs as well. Never seen before images of him like cooking scrambled eggs as well. But this is the hardback. This is Queen's Hand Press, and it is really, really nice. Very well put together. So for a collector, I would probably go for this. Because it is sort of very, very prestigious. It's very, kind of does somewhat scream luxury. But yeah, it's, I mean, it goes at over nearly 400 pages. And, there's all these various letters and introductions and things that Fleming had written for newspapers and things. But it's kind of the first time that it's been collected. So I would definitely get it. But however, the unfortunately there isn't much kind of Bond stuff in there, and I was kind of expecting a section on Bond, where they'd kind of had taken extracts from his notebook. But obviously all that's probably under lock and key in the Ian Fleming archives. One day they may release and give us a book, compile, like a compilation of Fleming's sort of unpublished work for Bond. Who knows? One day, it might be really cool. So yeah, Talk of the Devil. I would really, really recommend it. So the other subject was, was Roger Moore really that cheesy? Now this is something I've kind of been thinking about for a long time. Now, obviously, Roger Moore's portrayal of Bond was totally different to Sean Connery. And, it had to be. I kind of totally get why. Because, it's... I mean, Roger Moore's just playing Roger Moore. I love Roger Moore. I think what he did to Bond was fantastic. And the thing is, I love all the Bonds. I don't really have my least favourite actor. I love them all because they brought their own little sort of mark to the role. And Roger Moore, he was, I mean, my wife absolutely despises him. She just thinks he's just a knob. But that's probably just down to his smarminess and his one-liners and just how he is. Now, there's obviously, there's people out there saying, oh yeah, we should, make Bond films fun like they were, back in the Roger Moore days. Well, you can't quite do that because obviously, beliefs, times and attitudes have changed, especially towards women. I mean, I know a lot of, sort of older women, the wives of fellow Bond fans who don't like Roger Moore because they just find him a bit creepy, a bit smarmy and just cheesy. And kind of, I'm sort of on reflection, I'm thinking, well, I kind of get where they're coming from, but was he really, really that cheesy? And the conclusion I've come to, I think it's only 2 out of the 7 films that he did which kind of sort of shown Roger Moore's Bond in a very comical, cheesy, smarmy way. Whether or not that's necessarily Roger Moore's fault, I don't know, but I'm going to put it down to the screenwriter. And those 2 films are The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker, which obviously were kind of back to back. They were both directed by Lewis Gilbert. They were both written by Christopher Wood, who was known for his Confessions of a Milkman, Confessions of a Window Cleaner. He was the geezer who sort of wrote the kind of soft core porn of the 1970s. He also did the novelizations of The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker. And if you read them, he has a bit of a thing for breasts. He likes his breasts, and I mean, what man wouldn't? I'm a breast man. So, yeah, I mean, The Spy Who Loved Me, it is considered a classic. It's, and Moonraker, they are both fantastic films. They are just totally pure escapism, and if you just want a 2-hour, just 2 hours of pure fun and enjoyment, those are the 2 films you go to. So Roger Moore's kind of take in those films, they are very cheesy. He does have some, one-liners. His kind of sexist remarks, of course, are totally to be frowned upon now. There is, a lot of moments where you think, bloody hell, you did that now, you would be done for rape. And yeah, I mean, there was, and the thing is those 2 films are somewhat very comical. I mean, you've obviously got Jaws, who's kind of, injects a lot of humour, with their interactions and stuff, and, it's his typical comic book kind of sort of a setup. You've then got, I mean, in Moonraker you've got the double taking pigeon. The Spy Who Loved Me, I don't think there's. I mean, there is humorous scenes in there. But yeah, I should think, the Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker, yeah, it is full of one-liners. It kind of is borderline thinking, you can't really do that now or say that to a woman now because it's times have moved on, thankfully. But also with those 2 films is it does kind of pay tribute to other films. I mean, obviously, Spy Who Loved Me, you've got a lot. You've got the musical reference to Lawrence of Arabia. Moonraker, you've got references to Space Odyssey, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Magnificent Seven. So, I mean, I'm not saying it's necessarily Hamlish's or John Barry's fault, but you've got a lot of musical references to other things in there which kind of probably take you out of the film a bit. So I've kind of always said that out of the 7 Bond films that Roger Moore did, 2 of them I kind of think that it does highlight the cheesiness of Roger Moore, and I totally get why, certain people kind of get the impression that you know, he was a bit smarmy, he was a bit creepy, he was, you know, just a little bit cheesy. But I just think that, you know, people kind of get it just from them two films. When you look at his other five films, I mean, Live and Let Die, you know, that was his first film. Um, he wasn't trying to be Sean Connery, and they, you know, the director, producer, script writers, particularly, you know, deliberately steered him away from Sean Connery. He never, you know, smoked cigarettes. He'd never ordered a vodka martini shaken not stirred. They wanted to kind of steer him away, and I totally get that. And with Live and Let Die, yes, you had some cracking one-liners, but I think that's more to do with Tom Mankiewicz. Now, if you look at Diamonds Are Forever, yes, Diamonds Are Forever, that could have easily been a Roger Moore film, because you have some one-liners in there, and I think that's really down to Tom Mankiewicz. Now, you move on to The Man with the Golden Gun, which was obviously Roger Moore's second Bond film. Guy Hamilton kind of wanted Roger Moore to be a little bit darker, and overall I feel that he does play the character a little bit darker in The Man with the Golden Gun. And you've obviously got that famous scene, which is often criticised, where Roger Moore, you know, when he first meets Maud Adams as she steps out of the shower, he does get a little bit rough with her, and he is, you know, about to slap her, but you could even tell that Roger Moore was very uncomfortable, and that just didn't suit Roger Moore, because Roger Moore isn't like that. Now, I mean, I'm not saying, you know, that it's okay to hit women, because it's not, and it's not okay for a woman to hit a man either. You know, let's just get it out there. Works both ways. But Sean Connery kind of did it, and when he kind of, you know, I mean, yeah, I mean, in his Bond films, he did slap a few women, and it kind of just sort of, as I say, it's not okay, but it kind of suited Connery. Whereas Roger Moore just generally just seems a lot more softer, a lot more gentle. For him to do it, it just didn't feel right. And even though even Roger Moore had issues with that, and they kind of then decided after that to kind of steer it away to another direction. And the thing with The Man with the Golden Gun is, I actually really like that film. I think it's very underrated. Yes, you've got your comical moments in there. You've got your J.W. Pepper, but Bond as a character, you know, Roger Moore does play it a little bit darker. I mean, he played it brilliantly in Live and Let Die, but I kind of felt that his character was a little bit darker in The Man with the Golden Gun. And then you get A Spy Who Loved Me, which, you know, it was Roger Moore's favourite film out of the lot. He had fond memories of that. And it is a classic. And again, you know, Moonraker's a classic. But then after Moonraker, he kind of, you know, they then did For Your Eyes Only. And For Your Eyes Only was actually written for some, you know, for another actor in mind. And by this point, Roger Moore was doing it on a sort of kind of film by film basis. He originally signed up to 4 films. His 4-film deal ran out with Moonraker. After that, it was just one film at a time. And For Your Eyes Only, I mean, that's my favourite of the Roger Moore films, and I think that is Roger Moore's best performance. He plays it totally different to how he did it in Moonraker and Spy Who Loved Me. He probably plays it a little bit darker, probably very similar to how he did in The Man with the Golden Gun. There was obviously that moment where he kicks Locke off the edge of the cliff in the Mercedes, which again Roger Moore was quite uncomfortable in doing. And then we then have Octopussy. Octopussy again. The film itself, you know, it is, you know, kind of a very sort of Cold War thriller. I mean, some people might argue that it's very Hitchcockian. It is a Cold War kind of setting. Well, similar to For Your Eyes Only, actually. And yeah, I mean, for a long time I had issues with Octopussy purely because it was, the old Bond dressing up as a clown. I just thought that just totally took me away. It just didn't seem right. But as I've got older, I've actually appreciated it. And also, Fleming did actually have an idea for a short story. Well, I don't know if it's a short story, but an idea for Bond to disguise himself as a clown. So that kind of makes the kind of whole thing sort of feel right, because it's actually Fleming. If it's come from Fleming, then it just kind of makes it that little bit more comfortable, because this is Fleming's character. That it's because I mean, you watch this, you think, really, would Fleming have approved of this? I mean, I think every time us hardcore Bond fans watch a Bond film, we always kind of in the back of my mind thinking, is this, would Fleming have approved of this? And obviously when they pay nods and references to the novels, we kind of, as fans, lose our shit, because I believe that with Bond, you have got to pay respect and pay, homage to the novels and to the character that Fleming's created, because if you don't, then what's the point? So it's always a bonus to kind of arc back to Fleming. And I think the fact that Fleming had an idea for a future story that Bond should be dressed as a clown, disguised as a clown, to get himself through a mission, kind of sort of acts as a bit of a comfort blanket, and therefore doesn't make the old clown sequence in Octopussy quite as sort of far kind of out there, away from Fleming. It was a Fleming idea, so it does kind of somewhat make it feel a little bit better. The only issue I do have with that is the old timing. I mean, Bond does pretty well to get in a caravan, to get his clown uniform on, and to put his own makeup on within minutes. That's the only thing that kind of puts me out of it. But at the end of the day, he's a spy. He's got to use his the resources which are available. He's got to do the best he can to kind of get the job done. And being a spy and using disguises is one of them things. So yeah, it took me a long time, but the fact that and let's be honest, Roger Moore is the only one who could pull that off. I mean, Daniel Craig certainly couldn't. Sean Connery couldn't. Roger Moore's the only Bond that could probably, I don't know, could Pierce have pulled it off? I don't know. But no, I mean, Roger Moore was the only one who could, take Bond into space and, dress Bond up as a clown. And then you get A View to a Kill, which, again, it has its dark moments, and I kind of felt that again, I love that film, and the only thing that kind of let that film down was the old shower scene. What that film should have ended with Bond and Stacey on the Golden Gate Bridge, because up until that shower scene, we had a really nice kind of somewhat Roger Moore being very much of like a paternal figure to Stacey Sutton. I mean, obviously Tanya Roberts, she was, half his age, and even Roger Moore kind of said, look, when the leading ladies are young enough to be your granddaughter, that's when you've got to seriously consider, am I right in playing Bond? And and he did step down, and he did it gracefully. But I kind of always thought, A View to a Kill, he's too old, and throughout that film he meets Stacey, and when he goes to Stacey's house and makes the famous quiche, there's always that scene kind of where like he tucks her in bed and just sleeps in the rocking chair with a shotgun, and that's really nice. Is obviously in no rush to get into bed with her, and then and then that whole kind of shower scene at the end, it's like, oh, that's not the soap. Um, yeah, it kind of somewhat ruins that what they could have had, which was a kind of really interesting, a really different relationship. There's no need to have seen them in the shower, with Stacey fondling around for Roger Moore's soap, or groping Roger Moore's Bond. It would have been absolutely fine if it just was left on the Golden Gate Bridge and went straight to the titles, and then you could then imagine what you wanted. Did they get a taxi down? Did they do it? Did they not? And I just think that would have been so much better. So yeah, with Roger Moore, I kind of feel that the 2 out of his 7 films are what gives a lot of people, especially the women, the impression that he's very smarmy, he's very cheesy. I mean, a perfect example is I have an auntie who is actually 10 years older than me, and she absolutely hates Bond. And it was quite hilarious because many years ago I got GoldenEye on VHS one Christmas, and we all sat down, and she just flat out refused not to join us. She just went in the kitchen and washed the pots and just could not sit and watch it. And she absolutely hated Bond. Her reason was, well, it's stupid because, when he should have died, he always survived stupid things and blah, blah, blah. And the kind of more I kind of think about it, I thought, well, okay, Roger Moore would have probably been the Bond when she was growing up, and I should imagine her dad must have, liked the Bond films and watched them on telly, and she just thought this is just stupid. So the reason why she kind of despises Bond is probably of Roger Moore, and it could well be just seeing, those 2 films. Now, for the people who kind of think, oh, Roger Moore's stupid, Roger Moore's silly, he's creepy, he's tongue-in-cheek, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I would suggest you kind of watch his other films. Do not watch The Spy Who Loved Me or Moonraker, because, yes, those 2 films kind of do sort of rightly emphasise that. And I believe that those 2 films do kind of make him look, does sort of come across our way, which I get and I respect. But yeah, I just think it's interesting how, don't get fooled. Just those 2 out of his 7 films he did, is enough to make people think, oh yeah, it's cheesy, smarmy and all this and that. Where, in fact, the remaining 5 films, I thought it were pretty solid. They were pretty kind of, sort of, not as cheesy, not as smarmy as, the films of the late 70s, Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker. Which then kind of makes me think, was the 1980s, the strongest decade for Bond in terms of Fleming? Now, yes, we got the 1960s, which obviously, James Bond in the 1960s, it was, the 60s were swinging, Bond mania swept across the world, James Bond came on, we've never seen any films like it, Sean Connery was a man. The first 4 films were relatively faithful to the books of Fleming. You Get to You Only Live Twice, it kind of went a little bit doolally. But the 1980s, again, I mean, you start from Few Eyes Only. You have got, I mean, some people will probably say that Few Eyes Only is in par to From Which We Love in terms of being a true gritty spy thriller. Few Eyes, yeah, it does deal with the Cold War, and it is Roger Moore's best performance, as I said earlier. And there's Fleming in there, it's a mixture of the Few Eyes Only short story with a hint of Rosico and elements of the Live and Let Die novel as well. So it is pure Fleming. I mean, there is, light-hearted moments. There is the chase with the Citroen 2CV, which, fantastic. But overall, I kind of feel that is, there's a lot of Fleming in there, and it is solid. Octopussy, again, it's kind of very based loosely on the short story. Um, Again, it's based, well, it's based taking elements of from Octopussy and The Property of a Lady. They've kind of combined the two. They've added a few more characters in. Again, it's Cold War setting. It is pretty grounded, you know. And yeah, as I said earlier, the old clown circus sequence took me out of the film, but over the years, I've actually come to like it. You know, it is a solid film. A View to a Kill. That's probably the only film of the 1980s which isn't massively inspired. I mean, the only, apart from the title and the Paris location, that's what it has in common with the short story. But everything else is kind of sort of written around it. Zorin, you could probably say, is probably slightly inspired by Drax with a sort of Nazi background. And yeah, again, I mean, it is a very dark film, and it is some ways, you know, the plot is very similar to Goldfinger, you know, in terms of, you know, Goldfinger wanted to eradicate, you know, kind of contaminate for, you know, the gold supply to make the value of his gold go up, whereas Zorin wanted to flood Silicon Valley to make people want to buy his microchips. So it is very similar. And, you know, the thing with A View to a Kill is I've always, you know, there is a lot of dark moments in there, you know. And again, I mean, you've got your fantastic chemistry interactions with Tibbett and Moore, you know, with Patrick McNee and Roger Moore, you know, Tibbett and Bond. You've got, you know, the death of Tibbett, which is quite of a dark moment. You've got, you know, somebody going in, checking the oil wells and getting minced up in the fans, in the propellers. So there is kind of a few gruesome moments in there. But it's the thing. How I see it is to have a Bond film that's, you know, kind of someone very Fleming-esque. It needs to be a bit cold and, you know, dark in places, and A View to a Kill as that. I mean, obviously, apart from the old, you know, kind of ending up in the shower with Stacey Sutton, which, as I said, yeah, I kind of felt that kind of ruined the film. But no, I mean, A View to a Kill, you know, again, it was, you know, pretty solid, pretty dark film, and it is the kind of epitome of the 1980s. If you want to know what the 80s is like, watch A View to a Kill. You've got the fashion, you've got the colour, you've got the styles, you've got the music. You know, that is the height of the 80s. Bit like Her Majesty's, I always feel, is the height of the 60s. You know, you've got the, you know, again, the fashion, you know, the colour schemes and everything. You know, it just seems, you know, I mean, you can't get any more 60s than a Majesty's Secret Service. You can't get any more 1980s than A View to a Kill. And then, you know, to follow A View to Kill was A Living Daylights, which again, you know, different Bond, you know, a lot, you know, an actor, Timothy Dalton, who wanted to go back to the books, who was actually a forerunner to Daniel Craig, you know, and you got The Living Daylights, which again is a Cold War thriller, totally dark, 100% pure Fleming. You know, you've got, you know, the Living Daylights short story in there, and you know, you've got a lot of Fleming in there. The 1980s seems to have probably, you know, a lot of Fleming in there. License to Kill, you know, again, you've got elements of Live and Let Die in there, you know, and Hildebrand rarity, you know, you got Fleming in there. And out of the two, I prefer License to Kill than Living Daylights. Living Daylights I've never really sort of gone on with, but I mean, you know, they are both, and they are John Glenn films, you know, all five. You know, it was a decade where we was getting Bond films every 2 years, you know, even though there was a change of guard, there was a change of actor, they still managed to get it out in 2 years. and it's pretty impressive considering, the weight that we have nowadays. But, you know, the 1980s was actually consistent. The 1960s, 1980s we have 5 films. 1960s we have 6 films actually. And again, it's probably similar because we did have a change of actor again. And then 1970s we only got 4 films. Same actor, but we got 5 films. Sorry, yeah, I suppose 5 films. Yeah, Diamonds Are Forever. But obviously they had the legal issues between Man with the Golden Gun and Spy. So if it wasn't for that, we may have got a 6th film in 1970s. But no, the 1980s I kind of feel isn't celebrated enough in the terms of Bond, because I always think that the 80s, even though they probably didn't do as well as they did in the 60s in terms of box office, they were, nonetheless, solid films. The 1980s, it was consistent. It was just, again, very much pure Fleming, and they were, solid films. So, yeah, that is today's sort of little rant. Well, not rant, but little kind of thoughts. So yeah, was Roger Moore really that cheesy? And was the 1980s, probably a very good time for Bond? And if you haven't bought Talk of the Devil, I suggest you get Talk of the Devil now, because it's a very good book. So yeah, that's it for now. In terms of Bond news, what's happening? I don't know. I believe that some people have received confirmation that Her Majesty's Secret Service La La Land release is being posted. So some of you, and including myself, may get that very soon. Denis Villeneuve began work on Dune 3, which would probably mean that Bond would start next year. What else is there? And I think that's it. I don't think there's anything else to report. So yeah, things are, kind of moving. Quantum of Menace is, I believe, are taking pre-orders now, available from Waterstones, and I think the book cover has been finalised and revealed, which still doesn't interest me. There's been no sign on Kim Sherwood's 3rd Bond novel, so we're still waiting for the title on that. That was originally supposed to be due August this year, but I think that now has been postponed. So yeah, in terms of Bond news, I don't know what's happened really. Well, there's nothing to report since last time. If you were not aware, Shaken and Stirred, the James Bond group on Facebook, have just released tickets for their Bond event in October at Pinewood Hotel for King and Country. Now this is to celebrate 60 years of Thunderball, 40 years of View to a Kill, 30 years of GoldenEye, and 10 years of Spectre. So that, I'm attending, I'll be there, and I'm sure a lot of other people will be there as well. What I did forget to mention is I actually attended their event at Amberley back in May, which was to celebrate 40 years of A View to a Kill. And yeah, it was an absolutely fantastic day out. Amberley Museum is a place in the south coast of England, south of England, not far from Brighton, not far from Chichester. And it was basically the location of Zorin's mine in A View to a Kill. And every now and again they have a James Bond day, where they have Aston Martins and stuff and everything. And Shaken and Stirred tagged onto it. They brought in guests from A View to a Kill. They brought in John Glenn, who of course was the director, and Anthony Way, who was the executive producer. And yeah, it was a brilliant day. It was, questions and answers. I managed to have a ride on Zorin's little locomotive. but yeah, it was an absolutely fantastic day, and I kind of feel that when you meet with fellow Bond fans, and you know they are also friends. I mean, there's people who I've known for years through the James Bond radio days, so it's always nice to meet up with them people, and just talk Bond, and it's actually sort of those gatherings which kind of somewhat help keep the spark. I mean, even though when Bond news was quiet, it's when you go to these gatherings and you meet other Bond fans, that kind of what sort of keeps the spark going. And I kind of said to him, I really want to be doing a lot more of these gatherings if I can. Keep doing it. Go to these events and stuff, because these events do have. I mean, the one in October, you've got Paul Weston there, you've got John Richardson, Keith Hampshire. You've got various of people who've worked on the Bond films, and Norman Wanstall. These people aren't getting younger. Again, John Glenn's. I mean, John Glenn's 94. Well, he's certainly in his 90s, but he's absolutely fantastic. I mean, he's still going strong to this day. So hats off to him. So whilst we've still got these people, that's when you want to, kind of sort of keep hold of them. Unfortunately, I don't think they've got many people who are still around for Thunderball, because that was 60 years ago, so I think a lot of them have sadly passed. But yeah, I mean, whilst we've still got these people who've worked on the Bond films, this is an opportunity to kind of meet them in person whilst you can, because, we don't get younger, I'm afraid, we do get older. So yeah, I think until next time, I think that's about it. So, in the world of Bond, it's pretty much the same as last time. There's been no new snippets on 007 First Light. There hasn't been much kind of development from IFP, apart from the announcement of the James Bond of the Secret Agent Academy. So yeah, it's kind of a little bit quiet on the Bond front, but at least we do know that Bond 26 will be coming. At least the gears are rolling. At least we've got a director. It's just waiting on the story and on the actor. So yeah, apart from that,